Look at Africa, we have, just for sub-Saharan Africa only, we have over 100 million people who do not own a formal bank account. But what's interesting is that you have these people having subscribed to mobile payment services. So they have a sort of mobile payment account with, for example, in Kenya, M-Pesa, Airtel Cash. If you come to Rwanda, you have Tigo Cash, you have all these forms of mobile money-based service payments. And so we are looking to create a digital bank for these people for three reasons. The main one being creating an ecosystem that allows everyone to be included financially, a financially inclusive ecosystem. And basically what we want to allow people to do or to be able to have is to save for family needs, to borrow to support their businesses, to build a cushion for emergencies, unforeseen emergencies that demand financial that demand them to use their money to offset themselves from whichever situations they might find themselves in. And so the project is ambitious, but we are backed by a team from Sweden. It's a technology company publicly listed in the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. It's called Stockholm IT Ventures. It's a young company in itself, but they have great resources in terms of finances and in terms of technology. And they have a lot of subsidiary companies across Europe that are doing work using the blockchain and recently using cryptocurrency.
Right. It's interesting that you already touched on the issue of financing of this project, which I wanted to come to, because one of the things is that it is one thing to actually have a project in mind, but it's the other to actually finance it, because most of the time this is one of the major challenges. You say you already have about £400 million in terms of support as far as investment is concerned in this. Talk to me a bit about how you have already started utilizing this financing to actually actualize this dream.
And tying it in with a vision that my team here in Africa have for the continent, which is basically to create an inclusive financial ecosystem by using the blockchain and cryptocurrency. We find that now we have a strong starting base to implement some of these technology in Africa, and specifically focusing on sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
So the next steps would be to Mauritius as a sandbox that allows us to experiment with this kind of technology. And so in terms of ease of doing business, we're looking at Rwanda as our next country where we are hopefully going to launch our AIRDROP in the next coming few weeks, to sort of try introduce what we are doing to the market and have it tested already by external parties to sort of prove authenticity, and hopefully we will attract collaborators and partners who we can work together with on this project.
Right. Of course, we are seeing a growing appetite for cryptocurrency across Africa, but the challenge today is the question of regulation, which is still an issue. We have governments across Africa which have actually even told their banks, their local banks, not to engage in cryptocurrency trading. So how are you going to deal with this particular stumbling block of regulation of cryptocurrency? And you hear saying we want a cryptocurrency for Africa. How do you deal with this?
Interesting question, Eugene. And of course, the main challenge with in terms of cryptocurrency is that it's not regulated, and it's very hard to regulate it. Sort of like someone saying, when we had the internet boom back in the 90s, it was very hard for anyone to regulate the internet. And even up to date, it's very hard to regulate the internet. And so individual governments cannot do that. And so this is the same with cryptocurrency. It's global, it's open, it's on the internet, it's happening there. And so governments find it really hard to try and regulate this kind of technology. But speaking on in terms of some governments threatening to, not really threatening, but strongly advising banks not to take up this technology. Meanwhile, we have countries like Japan, who has allowed the trade of Bitcoin as part of how they build the economy in Japan. And we see Japan is a really strong economy globally. And so there are ways that this kind of technology can be invested in particular countries, and just sort of being monitored, but you can't fully regulate it. And speaking on the same note, we have countries like Tunisia, which has a government-owned digital currency. It's called e-dinar. And at the same time, we have a country like Senegal, which is developing a digitally owned currency by the government, and that if it comes to play, if it comes to use to fruition, it will be used potentially across the Francophone countries in Africa.
Right.
So we have a back and forth. It's accepted, it's not, but the value of it still stands.
Right. So there's still a future or light at the end of the tunnel. One of the moonshot goals that you have is actually to share this particular project that you have with President Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, who's actually the chair of the African Union, so as to see the African Union adapt this particular project. If President Kagame had your ears right now, what would you be telling him to convince him to actually convince the rest of his peers to take this up?
Well, Eugene, as you've said it, it's a moonshot expectation. And, you know, one real thing my team and I admires about President Kagame is his ability to identify and welcome and support and promote youth innovation, youth entrepreneurship. And we can see that the perfectly good example that Rwanda has set across the continent in terms of taking up new kind of risks in technology, in science, and in youth businesses, and promoting that to make sure that they build a strong economy. And so, you know, a few of the people we are working with here in Mauritius are involved with the African Parliament, and they absolutely love the idea, and they love the implementation of it so far in Europe. And so, you know, the hope would be that we can have an opportunity to present this idea to President Kagame, who sits at the chair as the chair of the African Union, and hopefully with his you know, cabinet members and his teams, see how effective this idea can be for Africa. Because as we see in the next, in 2018, the next 2 years, as predicted by GSM applications, Africa is going to have a mobile subscriber base of 725 million people. Majority of these are on mobile service payment accounts, but they do not own bank accounts. And 65 million people in Africa currently save money informally. If you're familiar with chamas in Kenya or merry-go-rounds.
Yeah.
So we have people using informal means of saving money, while they can have a wallet in their phone and save their money on their phone, have full control of how they send money, how they receive money, how they buy and pay for services, buy products and pay for services at a really, really reduced cost. So generally, the technology is threatening to institutions like banks and mobile telecommunication services that offer you know, mobile money payment services, and also remittance companies like MasterCard and Visa, like Western Union and MoneyGram, because they charge really high commissions in terms of people sending and receiving money. And what this technology offers is an extremely reduced rate of doing this. And we're seeing companies across Africa sprouting up using the digital, using blockchain to try offer people a solution to send money, to receive money, to pay for products and services.
Right.
But our moonshot expectation, as I mentioned, is with the financial backing we have from Roger and the Nortol group of company, the Nortol Oil Incorporated company, we are able to drive a huge campaign for this solution and implement it across the continent.